Good morning and welcome back to Kabbalah and Coffee. We're going to start today Kabbalah of Pesach, which I chose a Mamar, a very famous Mamar of the Alter Rebbe, on the subject of Pesach. The Mamar is in Likutei Torah, known as the Sheshes Yomim Tochal Matzos. Okay, so we'll begin right now. As always, I will read and I will explain. Sheshes Yomim Tochal Matzos This discourse is based on the verse that we just referenced in Deuteronomy, where it says, for a period of 6 days you should eat matzahs, and on the 7th day it shall be a restraining, a day of no labor, a holiday for you. We need to understand, why does God say in this verse 6 days? You should eat matzahs. Beforehand, in just a few verses earlier, it says, the same God tells us in the Torah that you should eat matzahs for 7 days. So the Alter Rebbe answers like this: that in this verse where he says you should eat 6 days matzahs, this verse is not coming to tell us about the mitzvah of eating matzah at all, which is indeed 7 days, as we read, as the verse a few verses earlier indicates. Eating matzah is a 7-day mitzvah, and this mitzvah is not telling us anything about the mitzvah of eating matzah. What it is telling us is that on the 7th day it will be a holiday. That's what the purpose of this mitzvah is. That the 7th day is a holiday of no work. The days earlier you can work. Not all days. The first day is also a holiday. But not all the days of Pesach are days where you can't work. The verse over here is coming to tell us not that about the mitzvah of eating matzah. It's telling us about the fact that the 7th day is a Yom Tov, is a day that you're not allowed to work. Ach mashihig dim Sheshes Yomim Tochal Matzos mashmo sakosavu da deze Sheshes Yomim Tochal Matzos al deze yachkach v'yimashvi atzereschu. But the question still remains: if this verse is not telling us anything at all about the mitzvah of eating matzah, so why is it telling us to eat for 6 days? Don't say anything about eating matzah for 6 days. Just, you want to tell us that the 7th day is a holiday, just tell us the 7th day of Pesach is a holiday. You don't have to start with a words that mislead. The words are misleading. It says 6 days you should eat matzah. But a person that doesn't know any better is going to go away thinking the mitzvah is only to eat matzah for 6 days. The 7th day you can eat bread. If you tell me that this verse is only about the fact that the 7th day is a holiday, just tell us that. Why do you have to preface it by saying that for 6 days it's a holiday, the 6th day you should eat matzahs? Don't say anything about eating matzahs in that verse. You understand? No? Yes or no? Allah. But the answer is that what the verse is really trying to tell us is a deeper thing, a deeper message. That the 7th day will be a holiday only as a result of you eating matzahs for 6 days beforehand. In other words, this 7th day cannot be observed as a holiday if you don't have the 6 days beforehand eating matzahs. This too needs to be understood. What is the connection between eating matzahs for 6 days before and the 7th day being a holiday? What is the connection between the two? Furthermore, the question is even more. So the question is even greater. Somehow, what he's answering over here is that the Torah is linking eating matzah with the holiday of the 7th day of Pesach. That without the eating of matzah, you won't have the 7th day. You can't have the 7th day as a holiday. Somehow the matzah leads it in. The fact that you ate matzah brings you to be able to have a holiday, to observe the holiday the 7th day. First of all, why? And furthermore, the question is even further. Why do we have a holiday on the 7th day of Pesach? Anyone? Why is the 7th day of Pesach a holiday? The first day I know why. We went out of Egypt. But why the 7th day? Very obvious. That's the day that God split the sea. The splitting of the sea, you know the famous story in the Bible, that the Jews crossed the sea and it split for them. That happened on the 7th day, a week after they left Egypt.
Oh, okay.
Right? So what are you telling me now? That if you don't, that without the 6 days of eating matzah, you can't really get to the 7th day as a holiday. He's asked a profound question right now. He says, the first year when they left Egypt, that year, 3,325 years ago, which is exactly how many years ago they left Egypt? 3,325. 3,325 years ago, as of this year. When they left Egypt, how many days were they commanded to eat matzah? That year. God told them not to eat chametz, they should eat matzah. How many days?
7 days.
No, 1 day.
6.
1 day. And that year the mitzvah of eating matzah was only 1 day.
That first day?
Yeah, first day. That's a fact. The mitzvah to eat, stay away from chametz 7 days, and to eat matzah for 7 days, it came later. But that year there was only a prohibition of eating chametz only 1 day. And nevertheless, even though they ate matzah only 1 day, somehow they merited to have the great miracle of the splitting of the sea, even if they didn't eat matzah for 6 days. That means that holiday came upon them with matzah or without matzah. Now you're telling me that in order to have the 7th day, you need matzah for 6 days. Why? It seems like there's no connection. There was a great miracle that happened on the 7th day, whether they ate the matzah or not. They didn't eat matzah for 6 days. And nevertheless, they had the great miracle. So why can't we celebrate that miracle on the 7th day of Pesach, whether we eat matzah or not? What's the connection between eating matzah and that holiday? And the 7th day is our holiday. You understand the question, yeah? In the Pesach that they observed in Egypt, that year the mitzvah of not eating leavened bread was only 1 day. Chametz is leavened bread. Okay, so you remember that term, chametz, right? It's leavened, the bread is chametz. That means they merited the mitzvah, the great miracle of the splitting of the sea, without eating matzah for 6 days beforehand. So why are you telling me now that this verse in Deuteronomy is telling us that the main message of the verse is that you have to, in order to have the 7th day as a day of holiday, you need to have a preface of 6 days of eating matzah? It doesn't seem that was the case the first time. Why does it say that for generations to come, in the future, up till now and forever, we need to have the observance of eating matzah 7 days? That's number one. Then the second question is, why do we even have to eat matzah for 7 days? Generally speaking, if that year they only had to eat 1 day, why do we have a mitzvah for perpetuity for 7 days? Why do we have to eat matzah for 7 days and not 1 day? If that year it was good for 1 day, why is it not good now for 1 day?
He wants us to.
I know that, but the question is there a reason why he wants us to? Is there some kind of deeper meaning here? The Gam also the Davke the Sheshes Yomim Tochal Matzos they do Shiach level the and the second question, as we just said before, is why is it that only after eating matzah for 6 days could you reach the holiday of the 7th day? So you got two questions over here. Why do we have to eat matzah for 7 days, period? If then they only ate matzah for 1 day. And also, why is it that in order to have the great celebration of the 7th day, you need matzah, to have eaten matzah for 6 days as a preface, as a preparation? Then they didn't need it. וגם לא עמד בשביל של פסח נאמר עצרס להשם אלוקיך בשמין עצרס again וגם לא עמד בשביל של פסח נאמר עצרס להשם אלוקיך ובשמיני עצרס נאמר עצרס תהיה לכם. Another question. In the seventh day of Pesach, it says that it should be a day of restraining, as we just read in the verse. It should be a restraining for Hashem, your God. There is another holiday that the Jewish people observe right after Sukkot. It's called Shmini Atzeres, the 8th day of Sukkot. And over there it says, on the 8th day you should celebrate it as a holiday, as a day of restraining. It doesn't say a restraining to God your Lord, it says a day of restraining to you. So on the 8th day of Pesach, it says it's a day of the 8th day of Sukkot, and Sukkot is in October. The 8th day of this holiday of Sukkot, the Torah uses the same language, atzeres, a restraining, but over there it says to you. Whereas by this, the last day of Pesach, it uses the same language of restraining. It's a restraining, but not to you, but to God your Lord. What's the difference? Why over here is it to you, of to God your Lord, and by Sukkot it's to you? Another interesting nuance, which the Rebbe will get to and answer this, all based on some spiritual, mystical understanding of the whole Yom Tov of Pesach, we'll get an understanding of this.
Isn't this the most important holiday for the Jewish people?
The Jewish people have an interesting thing about their holidays. On every holiday, that's the most important holiday, especially when you learn Chassidus, Kabbalah. If you're on Pesach and you're learning a discourse about Pesach, that's the most important holiday. If you're on Rosh Hashanah and you're learning a discourse about Rosh Hashanah, that's the most important holiday. And the truth is they're all the most important because every holiday has something about it that is truly unique. But your question is a valid question. What is the most... it's where it all began. No question, Pesach is when it all begins for the Jewish people. That's when they became a nation. So you're right, that has something about Pesach that is unique. So we're going to begin now to explain the whole... In order to understand all this, Alter Rebbe is going to explain the whole meaning of eating matzah on Pesach.
Rabbi, can you stop right here for 1 second?
So the Alter Rebbe is going to go into now a whole explanation, the mystical understanding, of what the eating matzah on Pesach is all about. But before he does that, he asks another few important questions. The Also, we need to understand there's a verse in the book of Exodus, in the portion of where it discusses the Exodus from Egypt. It says over there the following: they baked the dough. The Jewish people baked the dough that they took out of Egypt. They baked them into matzah cakes, flat matzah cakes, because it wasn't able to become chametz because they were chased out of Egypt, and they couldn't wait. It takes time to make it leaven. Takes some time. You got to let it rise and so on. So they were chased out in such haste that they couldn't even let the dough rise. So therefore, they ended up being baked into matzah cakes. Which this verse seems to indicate that this is giving us a reason why we eat matzah for always. It's giving us the reason why they baked it into matzah. When they left Egypt, they baked it into matzah cakes, not into leaven, because they were chased out of Egypt and they didn't have time to let it rise. V'zeh tamua, this is very strange. This does not make sense at all, the Alter Rebbe says. Why? They were given a prohibition while still in Egypt against eating chametz for 1 day. God commanded them while they were still in Egypt, before they were chased out, not to eat chametz at least for 1 24-hour period. So if that's the case, the fact that they didn't eat chametz, it was baked into matzah cake, had nothing to do with the fact that they were chased out. Because if they would walk out at their leisure, even if they weren't chased, even if they had all the time in the world, they wouldn't be able to bake it into chametz. Because they had a prohibition. It was prohibited for them to eat chametz that 1 day. So why is the Torah misleading us, or seemingly misleading us to think that the reason that they didn't eat chametz, that they didn't bake it into chametz, instead they baked it into matzah, was because they were chased out. It had nothing to do with the fact that they were chased out. There was a prohibition against eating chametz. Right? You didn't know that?
No.
Yeah, now you know. It's understood? Gam lohavin, another question we need to understand is as follows. Bashakosef b'Haggadah, it says in the Haggadah, Haggadah is what we read on the Seder night. Matzah zu sha'on ha'ichlum, over there too, we say the words, this matzah, and the custom is we lift up the matzah cover and we uncover the matzah to show this matzah that we're eating. Sha'on ha'ichlum al shumah, why do we eat this matzah? And we answer right away, al shum shalei hizbu, but sexual of saying lachmitz. So another question he asks. In the Haggadah, we say the words, this matzah, why do we eat? We eat it because we answer right away. The reason is because the dough of our forefathers in Egypt did not have time to rise because they were hastily taken out of Egypt. Right? God revealed himself, and they were scooped out of Egypt in a haste, and there was no time to have the bread leavened. So they had to eat matzah. It ended up being matzah. Right? But this is not either 100% accurate. Why? Weren't they commanded in Egypt the day before that they should eat matzah and mortar and bitter herbs? They had a specific mitzvah from God to eat matzah that night before they left Egypt. So they had a mitzvah to eat matzah that day and not to eat chametz. So why are you telling me that the reason we eat matzah today is because it didn't have time to rise? Has nothing to do with that. It's a mitzvah. It was a mitzvah to eat matzah that night. Whether in Egypt, out of Egypt, there was a mitzvah to eat matzah that day. And that's the reason, seemingly, why we eat matzah tonight at the Seder. Not because there was no time. And again, we said just before, even if they had the time, they wouldn't be able to make it into chametz because they had a prohibition against eating chametz. So the whole thing is not making sense. We're giving reasons that seemingly don't really fit. In other words, the Torah gives us a commandment to eat on the 15th night of Nisan. In the Hebrew month of Nisan, on the 15th night, there's a mitzvah in the Torah that on that night you should eat matzah.
Okay.
So when we ask in the Haggadah, all the people are sitting at the table, the children, the adults, and we ask, why do we eat matzah tonight? What would be the logical reason to answer? What would you think the reason to be answered would?
Because we were commanded.
Because we have a commandment to eat matzah. What's the question? Well, we don't say that. We give a whole different reason. We say the reason we eat matzah tonight is because they didn't have time for leavening, and they ran out of Egypt, and there was no time to rise, and they ate matzah cakes. That's not the reason. The reason is because we have a mitzvah that this night we should eat matzah. Furthermore, the seshnik lalei malach malcham lachem malcham lohayachar chatzis light. Vitziva matzah mereinu yichlu eine kedem chatzis laila, shapes chen nechel alat chatzis, v'chein matzah shon nechel megam ken kedem chatzis dafka. V'im kein nechel ashum chulu shenig lechul. Another good question. What do we answer in the Haggadah? What's the reason we eat matzah? Because that's the night
The angel of death.
That they were, our forefather did not have time for their dough to rise, because God Almighty had revealed Himself in a great revelation in Egypt, and took the Jewish people out of Egypt through Moses. Right? When did that happen? When did this actual exodus happen? When did God reveal Himself in Egypt? It was after midnight, the 15th of Nisan. After midnight. Right? When is the mitzvah to eat matzah? When was the mitzvah to eat the matzah and the bitter herbs?
The 15th of Nisan.
The 15th of Nisan. When? Specifically, before midnight. The mitzvah is to eat the matzah before midnight, and indeed till today,
we have to eat it before.
We have to make sure to eat the matzah and everything before midnight.
Or you don't fulfill the mitzvah.
Or you don't fulfill the mitzvah. So you're telling me that the reason we eat matzah tonight, every year and the night of Pesach, is because God revealed Himself and schlepped us out of Egypt quickly. It's not even accurate from a historical point of view. That happened after midnight, and the mitzvah in Egypt was to do it before midnight.
So what is the Haggadah
and we
say
therefore, and that's the question. So how could you tell me that this is because of something that happened after midnight when we were already told to eat matzah before midnight?
What was the purpose that God made us them eat it before?
Well, here we'll find out soon. So it turns out that there are two types of matzahs that we eat. There's one matzah that they ate before midnight in Egypt, and we eat matzah before midnight also. But then it seems that there was another, they ate matzah a second time when they went out of Egypt. They actually ate another matzah because they didn't have time to rise, and they ran out with cakes and they ate the matzah. So they ate before, while they were still in their homes in Egypt. God told them specifically that night to eat the paschal offering, the meat of the paschal offering, and the matzah with the myrrh, with the bitter herbs, while they were still in Egypt. But then it seems they ate another time matzah when they actually left Egypt, in haste and that whole thing. So there's two types of, they ate twice matzah, it turns out. And these two eatings of matzah represent two spiritual, mystical ideas. And he's going to explain it in this discourse. V'ha'inyan dehine gabi be'erev teichlu matzah is shem matzah ksiv matzah choser vov. V'gabi v'yefu geimer uges matzah is ksiv matzah molei bevov. Another interesting nuance in the verse in Exodus. In the verse that tells us that God told Moses, while they were still in Egypt, that they should eat matzahs, the word matzah, the word matzos, is spelled mem tzadik sof, 3 letters, Hebrew letters. It's missing a letter. It's missing the letter vav for matzos. Usually the word matzos should have a vav in it. In the verse that tells us that we should eat matzahs before midnight while we're still in Egypt, it doesn't say matzahs with a vav. But when it says later on that they baked the matzah cakes, the dough, and they were chased out of Egypt in haste, and they didn't have time for the bread to leaven, the dough to leaven, so they ended up baking it into matzah cakes, which happened, as we said, already after midnight. That instance of the word matzahs is written in the Torah with a vav.
With a vav. Mm-hmm.
You get this? This is all going to have deep meaning. The matzah that they ate before midnight lacks the vav. Doesn't have a vav in it. It's missing that letter vav. But the matzah that they ate after midnight when they left Egypt when they actually left Egypt is missing. It has the vav. Over there's a vav. What's the vav? Why over there is, over there isn't. We will learn this. V'hainu ki avov zehu ha'hamshocha m'shenigla aleim malach malcham lochim. What is vav? You know how the letter vav looks like? What does a vav look like? Who knows the Hebrew letters?
It's like a stick.
It's a vertical line going from top to bottom. That's what a vav looks like. So a line going from top to bottom. Let's put this all in perspective again. The matzah that they ate before Chatzos, before midnight, where did they eat it?
In their home.
In their homes in Egypt.
In Egypt.
The matzahs that they ate, the second time they ate matzah, when did they eat the second time?
On the road.
When they were chased out of Egypt. When was that? After midnight. What was the reason they ate those matzahs? Because there was a great revelation of God in Egypt. God somehow revealed himself down in Egypt, and that caused the Egyptians to all die, the firstborn, that plague of the firstborn, and there was a tremendous revelation. The Jews got up with Moses and they ran out of Egypt. Pharaoh chased them out. That's why we eat that, and at that instance they had dough, and because they were chased out, they didn't have time to rise, so they ended up baking it into matzah cakes, and they ate matzah, right? So the second eating of matzah after midnight was a result of the Exodus, which came as a result of God's great revelation in Egypt, right? The vav. And therefore that matzah has a vav. That instance of matzah has a vav. What does the vav represent? I said it's a line from top to bottom. What does that represent spiritually?
Revelation.
Godliness coming from top downwards, from up all the way down. The vav represents a great revelation of God from heaven down to earth. It's a vertical line.
So before
midnight it's missing the vav because there was no such revelation. But after midnight, there was a revelation. That's why they ate the second instance of matzah. Because it was a result of a great coming down of God from above downwards, like a vav. So the vav is inserted into the word matzah over there because that's what happened in the second instance of eating matzah. They ate that matzah in the haste because they were rushed out in haste. They were rushed out of Egypt because God revealed himself. The vav represents that revelation, and that's why they ate the matzah. And so it turns out that there were two matzahs. They ate twice matzah. The first instance of eating matzah is because it says of commandment. The first instance of eating matzah was while they were still in Egypt. And why did they eat that matzah? Because there was a commandment. God commanded them to eat matzah that night while they're still in Egypt. But that matzah was before midnight, before the great revelation, and therefore it's missing a vav, because it lacks the revelation. The second instance of eating matzah is is when they went out of Egypt, they did it in haste, and they didn't have time for the bread to leaven, and therefore they ate the matzah instead of leavened bread. This is the matzah they ate after midnight. That has a vav, representing the great revelation that happened then. In other words, in the matzah that they ate in Egypt while they were leaving, the second instance, while they were leaving, they had matzah again. In that matzah, there was the matzah itself represented, within it, there was an attachment to a great revelation of God that took place in Egypt that night. And therefore it says with a vav. Because in that matzah was represented that great revelation. Now, today when we eat matzah, which matzah are we eating?
With the vav.
Both.
Well, we're eating it before midnight.
What, that's without the vav then?
That's without, right? So what do we have today when we eat matzah? We have the first or the second?
Commandment? First?
What? It seemed like we have the first because we're eating it before midnight. So he explains, okay, Omar ba'agod the matzah zu shoneicham of shumashim shleid b'tzek shalav sein lach p'tachim niglalim malach malacham lachem chul shehu inyan matzah moli b'vov shoyach echat dark the matzah zu shoneicham ugam kim chinezu.
I don't know.
Now, huh?
I'm confused.
Why?
Because then he gave you an order to continue doing it year by year.
Right. So
I don't know if it's pre or post.
Oh. Well, we're not going to be confused for much longer. What did we say before? At the Seder, we all sit together with our families, and we ask the question, this matzah that we're eating here tonight, why are we eating it? What is the answer that the Haggadah gives? What?
Commandment.
No,
it's not what the Haggadah says.
The haste to run out of Egypt.
The Haggadah says the reason we're eating matzah is...
What we typically say.
What do we typically say?
Okay.
We are saying the answer that we answer in the Haggadah is that this matzah that we're eating is because they were rushed out of Egypt and our forefathers didn't have time for their dough to leaven because God revealed himself and schlepped us out. What we're saying over here, the author of the Haggadah is saying a great novelty over here. That you may think that the matzah that we're eating today is because of the commandment to eat matzah before midnight, which lacks the vav, which lacks that great godly revelation. No, we're eating the matzah today, also in the matzah that we eat, that has the advantage of the second instance of matzah, which comes along with the great revelation of God, represented by the vav. So even though we're eating it before midnight, we have both advantages. We have the commandment and we have the great revelation.
So in fact, it's really telling the truth then.
Sure, tell me. What do you think that doesn't?
No, but I'm saying, so it's really...
He answers the question.
Yeah.
V'hainu midiksiv Sheshes Yomim Tochal Matzos. B'vov shebezeh muven muchach shematzah shoneichel migam kim m'chinas madrega zu. L'chein al deze yom shel lisa b'yom hashviya atzeres chulu. All right. Could you do me a favor and open up this book again?
Good morning, everyone.
Turn to page 175 again. Did I say 175? I'm sorry. 170. Yeah, 175. Yeah. Verse 8. You see it on top? For a 6-day period, you shall eat matzahs. Do me a favor and look in the Hebrew on that verse. Sheshes Yomim Tochal. What's the next word?
Matzos.
Matzahs, how's it spelled?
With a vav.
With a vav. The commandment today to eat matzahs is with a vav.
Matzos.
And there's the vav.
There's the vav.
So it's post.
It has the vav. It has the matzahs. It has the. In other words, the matzah that we eat today is not the matzah that lacks the vav, which is the one that we ate before the revelation happened. But today our matzahs have within it the advantage and the great revelation of the infinite God that was revealed in Egypt for us. This also, and therefore, we're able to celebrate the 7th day, I'm sorry. In other words, he's answering over here on this first question now. What did we ask before? We ask, why does it say you should eat 6 days and then you'll have the 7th day? Which indicates that without 6 days you can't have the 7th day. Right?
Mm-hmm.
And the question was, what's the connection? The 7 days because of the great splitting of the sea, right? What? You understand? You remember the question? Well, now he's answering it. What is the connection between eating 6 days matzahs and the 7th day's holiday? Because the matzahs that we're eating today is the same matzah that they ate when they left Egypt, which had within it the great revelation, which came as a result of the great revelation of God. The matzah with the vav, representing the great revelation from top down. And it is only because of that great revelation that we're able to enjoy the revelations of God that took place at the splitting of the sea, which is why we celebrate the 7th day. But later on, he's going to explain it in more detail. So a number of questions were answered already here. Why in the Haggadah, when we ask, why do we eat this matzah, we don't answer because there's a commandment, but we answer because of the great revelation, because he's saying that specifically. That you should not think that the matzah we're eating today only has is the matzah that they ate before midnight. No, we have the matzah after midnight. And that's the answer that he gives, because God revealed himself. Because we have the great advantage of that revelation in our matzah that we eat. And we also understand now to some degree why the 7th day holiday comes as a result of the 6 days of eating matzah, because those 6 days eating matzah represent the revelation of God. And it's only as a result of that revelation that we can enjoy an even greater revelation on the 7th day of Pesach, which we will discuss in the continuation of this discourse. You understand? Now we get into some deeper mystical ideas. Next chapter. Chapters 2. In order to understand what these two levels of matzah represent, he's going to explain over here a general question. Why people even eat food? Why do we eat food altogether? Well, you say because we need to have sustenance. But the Alter Rebbe is asking a deeper question. Why does our sustenance have to come from food? Food is a lower level reality than the human. Right? Mm-hmm. In creation, there's 4 levels in the world, physical world. The lowest is inanimate, lifeless objects, stones, water, earth, things that are just, they are what they are, they don't grow, they just stay the same. Then you have trees, vegetation, that grow. Then you have the animal kingdom, right? Which not only grows, but is alive. It can move about. And then you have the human being. What are we saying over here? That in order for the human being to sustain himself, the highest level of creation should sustain itself and needs to somehow ingest lower levels of creation into his body in order to sustain himself. This makes not much sense. It should be the other way around. In order for the vegetation to be sustained, it should have to have the human element in it. If it's, that should be that's the right way it should be, right? Let's see it in the Alter Rebbe's words. To understand all of the above, we need to first preface another subject. It says in the verse, this is a verse in Deuteronomy as well. Over there it says, not by bread alone will man live. but by the Word of God. The Word of God. A man lives by the Word of God, not just by bread. Okay, what does that mean? It's an answer to a question. He's answering a question in this verse. The question is, how is it that bread, which is a much lower level than the human, is that which gives life to the human? How could a human, a higher level creation, receive its life force from a lower level creation? It's like you would say, in order for an angel to live, he has to have a little human. This should be the other way around. In order for us to sustain, so we should have a little bit of an angel in us. So how could it be that it's bread and other things of that level that are giving us life? So therefore the verse answers, it's not by the bread itself that you're living. You're living off the godliness that is in the bread. Because every single creation has within it a godly life force. So it's the life force within the bread that's giving you sustenance. But that doesn't really cut it. Why doesn't that cut it? Because if we know that in the beginning of creation, God said, let there be vegetation. Right? On the third day, He created all the vegetation. So that word, those words, let there be vegetation, tachi ha'oretz, that's the godly utterance of that creation. And those words are continuously in all vegetation. And it's that godly life force that is in the bread and the vegetable, everything that we eat that gives us life force. It's not the physical bread that gives you life force. It's the godly utterance that's in the bread, in the vegetation, and everything that we eat that gives us life force. That's what the verse is telling us. Not on the bread alone is man living, rather on the utterance of God's word in the bread. Clear? But this is a problem still. Because if that's the case, on the sixth day of creation, God said another utterance. What was the other utterance that God said on the sixth day? Let there be man. That means that there is a godly utterance in the man, in every human being. This is the life force of man, right? So why can't we live off that godly utterance? Why do we need the godly utterance that's in the bread? What did you answer us? It's not the physical bread. It's the godly utterance that's in the bread, the godly life force that's in the bread that's giving us life, that makes us live. Why do I need that godly utterance? I have my own godly utterance. Nasa Adam, let's make man. God said the word, let's make man. That is my life force. Why can't I live off that alone, that godliness that's in me already? Why do I need additional life force that's in bread? The verse didn't really answer anything. All it did was say you're not living from the physical bread, you're living from the spiritual, godly element that's in the bread. Why do I need that altogether? I have my own spiritual, godly element in me. Yeah. He'll answer that. That in that little bread, and therefore in matzah, and matzah even more than bread, you'll see soon. There's an even higher godly life force than in humans.
Matzah.
Yeah. Believe it or not, yeah. How could that be? It's a good question. It gets into the whole thing of the world of Torah, the world of Tikkun. Good, we'll continue next week.